My name's Aric A, and I'm a sleep scientist at UCSF. I study the causes and consequences of insufficient sleep, and I also carry out interventions to improve sleep among people with insomnia. Today I've been challenged to explain the topic of sleep at 5 different levels. Everybody knows a little bit about what is happening when they sleep, but I think they'll be surprised that there's a lot of science in there.
Nice to meet you. My name's Christopher.
Hey, Christopher. And how old are you?
I'm 10.
What grade is that?
I think 5th.
You think that? What is your favorite subject?
Math and science.
Well, that's awesome, because we're going to be talking about science today.
Cool.
And you know what we're going to be talking about?
What?
Sleep.
Favorite part of the day?
Mine too, because I get to spend all day studying it. Because you know what sleep does for you?
It rests your body like an electric car.
That's exactly right. It kind of is like recharging your battery, right? Mm-hmm. And sleep is so critical for so many parts of our body and our mind, right? It plays a really important way that we learn, and it helps us kind of recover from the day before. It affects our immune system and our metabolism, all of these things that we need to kind of be healthy.
Whoa.
So today we're going to talk about some animals and how they sleep. So here's the first one. What's that?
A giraffe.
Have you ever seen a giraffe in person?
Yeah.
They're pretty cool, right? Mm-hmm. And so what's really cool about this is that giraffes need to sleep like everybody else. And so the way that it does is it kind of slumps over and it gets down on its legs and it kind of becomes this ball. But what's crazy about the whole thing is they only sleep for like 30 minutes a day. 30 minutes, because it can't waste any more time, because it can't be vulnerable for any longer. It can get eaten by lions and that kind of thing. It is kind of evolved in a way that it can still survive and still get all the restoration it needs under such a short period of time.
I mean, how does it recharge like humans?
So we think it works the same way, but maybe just like more efficiently. And so we're still really learning about how this works. Sleep science itself is kind of a new field.
I had a sleepover on Saturday, and I didn't sleep at all.
And how did you feel?
Really tired.
Really
the next
tired.
day.
Do you think you were a little crankier than usual? Yeah. That's actually really interesting, because what happens is humans and everything needs to sleep eventually. And so you can't stay up indefinitely, right? What do you think happens if you don't sleep?
It affects what you can do in your daily life.
Excellent. So now I want to tell you about another animal and how they sleep. Okay? So we have this one. What's that?
A hippo?
A hippopotamus. They have a different challenge. They sleep underwater.
I can never do that. I would pass out.
Right. So how do they do it? In the area that they live, they need to stay cool, right? And so they spend a lot of time in the water. And so then as a consequence, they need to sleep in the water. But how do they do it? So it's really fascinating. What they do is while they're sleeping, they actually float back up to the surface and breathe without waking up. They're able to go about their whole sleep cycles, but still able to breathe because their body has adapted in a way that they can still get the oxygen that they need. It's a really amazing thing. What do you think?
That's cool.
Would it be cool to have that power?
Yeah.
So now I want to talk about our last animal. And I think this one is probably the most amazing of all. Okay, so what's this?
Oh, a dolphin.
A dolphin, yes. So dolphins, kind of like hippos, have to sleep in the water, okay? But because they're mammals, right, they need to breathe. Dolphins breathe air, they have to go up to the surface and breathe, right? And for an animal like that, it can get eaten, it needs to figure out a way that it can sleep, but also still survive, right? You know how dolphins sleep?
How?
1/2 of their brain at a time. So half of their brain goes to sleep, and the other half stays awake so that they can continue to breathe and swim. And they do it in this 4 hours at a time. So like their right part of their brain sleeps, they're able to go up to the surface and breathe. Then the left part of their brain sleeps for 4 hours, and it goes back and forth, so that they can kind of maintain alertness, still breathe, and survive. Is that amazing or what?
That's cool.
So what'd you learn today?
I learned how other animals sleep.
What is important about sleeping?
Sleep rests your body, and you have to rest your body in order to do your daily things in life.
Hey, I'm Aric.
I'm Dwayne. Nice to meet you, Aric.
And how old are you, Dwayne?
I'm 16 years old.
Okay, and where do you go to school?
McClymonds High School in Oakland, California.
Excellent. And what's your favorite subject?
AP Chemistry.
That's a serious science.
It is.
And good news, we're talking about science today.
Yeah.
In fact, we're talking about sleep. and
okay.
sleep science. Do you
Cool.
sleep?
I do. I try.
You try. Well, we all gotta try. You've probably heard about sleep as this kind of, it's a biological process that happens in your brain. It's really important for your body, but it's a lot more complex than that. Sleep is made up of different parts. When you think about sleep, what do you think about?
Resting, relaxing, really shutting down your brain, taking some time off from a busy schedule, work day.
But being off is just not being off. There's lots of things that are happening. We're gonna kind of talk about those different pieces of sleep.
Okay.
So our sleep is made up of different types, okay? The first one is called non-rapid eye movement sleep, or non-REM, okay? Or NREM. And then the other one, which is, might not be a surprise, is called REM, rapid eye movement sleep. And those are the two main types of sleep that happen. The way that we measure that as a sleep scientist is we actually will bring people into the lab, or they can do this at home, where we put electrodes on their scalp while they're sleeping, and then allows us to measure the brain activity that's going on during the night.
Okay. Are you able to tell how much sleep someone's getting or what their sleep schedule is by REM?
When we measure all of that, we're able to see, how much time someone's asleep and how many times they wake up and stuff during the night. We're also really interested in kind of the amount of non-REM sleep that someone gets and the amount of REM sleep that someone gets, because each part of those types of sleep do different things for the body. And so it's important to get both of those. And so within non-REM sleep, there are 3 stages ranging from N1 to N2 to N3. So not particularly clever in our naming, but that's how we know what stages they are. And what they do is it moves from lightest to deepest sleep, okay? And so in N1, it's more kind of light wakefulness sleep, kind of in and out of sleeping. Then you go into N2, which is where we spend 45 to 55% of our sleep. And it's more of this kind of light sleep, but then we get into kind of the really restorative sleep, and that's N3. And in N3, when we look at someone's EEG wave, we see these big, slow waves, and it's called slow wave sleep. And so we spend about 20% of our sleep in slow wave sleep, though it can vary on a day-to-day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When do you think you experience the most REM?
Well, I've heard that you don't really go into a deeper sleep, so I'm guessing N3 or any of the N's at all, really, if you are on technology. Right before you go to sleep. And also if there's too much light, or if you are listening to music while you're asleep or anything like that, you're not experiencing deep sleep, right?
Some of that is totally accurate, that when your brain's more engaged by being on your phone, or doing things that you really enjoy, or things that stress you out, or any of those types of things, it's harder to get to sleep and to kind of fall into that deeper levels of sleep. Most of the REM sleep, this dreaming sleep, happens in the second half of the night. Okay, so we wake up a lot during the night and we just don't remember it. And then you'll go back down into deep sleep, and then up again into REM, and and kind of these cycles.
Oh wow!
Right? Do you ever take naps?
I do.
Okay. How long are the naps that you take?
Anywhere between 1 to 6 hours.
1 to 6 hours?
Yes.
That's a long nap.
It is a long nap.
Okay. Usually we want to keep naps like 20 to 30 minutes. When people drop into deep sleep and then they're woken up out of a nap, most people report that they feel way worse than they did before they took the nap. And that's because you've been in deep sleep, and it's this term called sleep inertia. So what are the stages of sleep?
So N1 being light, sleep, still a lot of brain activity going on. I can imagine that happens right after you fall asleep. And then N2 being light, moderate activity in your brain, still sleep, but still kind of consciously aware. And then 3 being the deepest form of sleep.
I want to know if you agree. Sleep is the coolest thing you've ever heard of.
It really is. Right now, it definitely is the coolest thing I've ever heard of.
So tell me, where are you in school? What do you study?
I'm a 4th-year chemistry student at USF.
So pretty sciencey.
Yes, pretty sciencey.
Excellent, because today, for this level, we're talking about sleep.
Great.
Okay? How much sleep do you get, typically?
During the summer?
Sure.
10 hours.
10
and then
hours.
During the school year, maybe 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so how much do you think you need?
I mean, I've read that 6 is ideal for people in my age range.
Turns out, for people that are between the ages of 18 and 65, the agreed upon amount of sleep that people should get is between 7 and 9 hours, and it's really at least 7 hours per night to maintain optimal health as an adult. So at least 7 hours. When we look at across all of the data that is available on like sleep and health and sleep and psychiatric illness and those types of things, the largest risk is when people get 5 hours or less. What do you think kind of is responsible for driving kind of how much sleep you need and things like that?
I mean, I know sleep is kind of regulated by the thalamus and the suprachiasmatic nucleus sending signals to the pineal gland, which kind of secretes melatonin, which tells us like when it's time to go to sleep. And
right, you can do part of this level, and I will do the other part. Clearly got some expertise under your belt, and so that's awesome because I think that everyone should know more about sleep. And so the way that we think about what drives sleep are two kind of independent but kind of related processes. And so they have kind of lame names, process S and process C. Okay, and what you've kind of described is process C, and that's the master clock, right? And it helps regulate kind of the rhythms, like all of your body, all your cells and all those kind of things. It drives the release of melatonin from the pineal gland, and melatonin comes online under darkness. So when the sun goes down, your brain knows, okay, it's time to start getting ready for sleep, and so you start releasing melatonin, which really kind of sets the table for sleeping.
like I'm from Hawaii, so we have very long days. We have early sunrises, late sunsets. Does that signify like less sleep because we have a shorter amount of time for melatonin to be released?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And the same is true, in places where the sun never goes down during the summer and when it's dark all the time during the winter. And it turns out that light isn't the only thing that kind of gates your circadian rhythm. But I think the thing that's really important is, again, there are two processes, but the other one is the S process, and that one's just kind of a really important driver of sleep. And its formal name, we call it like the homeostatic sleep drive. Kind of the longer you're awake, the sleepier you get. You stay
Makes
up,
sense.
you get sleepy, time goes by, you get sleepier, time goes by, you get sleepier. But it's actually kind of a really fundamental principle for how sleep is regulated. And it's really kind of akin to like a balloon, okay? So, you wake up in the morning and your balloon is flat, like you've kind of like drained out all the sleepiness. But then as you kind of go throughout the day, it kind of fills up, right? So you can use your energy, it gets filled up. And then it gets filled up more, like as you get towards nighttime, right? And then when it's at like this optimal amount is when you kind of like go to sleep and you kind of like let out all the sleepiness again. And this is really what underlies kind of why napping can also be bad for you. So nappings aren't inherently bad, but if you actually let out some of this air during the day, it's going to take longer for the balloon to get bigger, right?
I
to where you
see.
feel sleepy, right?
Right.
What did you learn about sleep today?
I learned about the two processes, process S and process C. I learned about their circadian rhythm and how it doesn't only rely on like melatonin, but it also relies on your eating and like a whole bunch of other factors that kind of affect your circadian rhythm.
Hi, I'm Aric.
Maeve.
Thank you for joining us. What do you do? Where are you at in school?
So I'm at UC Berkeley. I'm a psychology student studying cognitive neuroscience, and I just started my third year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So a lot of brain stuff.
A lot of brain stuff.
Great.
I'm biased because I study one of the other subcortical parts of the brain, the cerebellum.
So that's good because that's why you're here. And so we're talking about sleep today, and really about kind of what is the brain machinery through which we go from kind of consciousness to unconsciousness and that transition.
Great.
Okay. The best way to think about this transition is really called it's a flip-flop switch. Okay, and so this term comes from engineering. And the idea is that in sleep, you basically have kind of this all or nothing kind of experience. Certainly people kind of drift off to sleep, but then all of a sudden you're unconscious, right? So it seems like it's this flip-flop between kind of the arousal system and then the sleep promoting system. And it's certainly regulated, and we'll get a little bit into that. But they're certainly kind of made up of two reciprocally inhibitory processes. Okay, so we have the ascending reticular activating system. It originates in the brainstem, and there's a dorsal and a ventral arm to this. And so the dorsal arm has neurons, cholinergic neurons, that go up to the thalamus, and then it projections into the forebrain. And then there's the ventral arm, and this is comprised of a whole bunch of different types of neurons. So they're all monominergic. So there's kind of dopaminergic neurons that come from the periaqueductal gray, serotonergic ones from the dorsal raphe nuclei, histaminergic neurons that come from the tuber mammillary nucleus of the hypothalamus, and then noradrenergic neurons from the locus cerealis. And so all of those are kind of working in tandem to kind of drive wake within the brain. And so if we just think about kind of drugs that are available for inducing wakefulness, we can, certainly kind of the dopaminergic ones kind of jump out, right? So we have kind of amphetamines that certainly kind of drive those signaling, and then modafinil, which is a wake-promoting drug for people that have kind of excessive daytime sleepiness that maintains alertness throughout the day.
In terms of the dopamine,
Yeah.
is, if you're taking amphetamines, that's usually to promote, as you said, wakefulness.
Yeah.
But does that actually improve the quality of your sleep? How reliable are those kinds of interventions?
The role that they play with respect to the sleep-wake system is really kind of amping up the wake system, right? And so certainly that has like downstream consequences for the sleep system, because now the flip-flop switch is kind of pushed, in a much stronger direction, and we have to kind of rely on what regulates sleep to kind of get it pushed back to sleep.
And do we know much about why, or which stages of the sleep cycle are affected? If you take amphetamines, is it then when you go to sleep you're not able to transition through each of the different sleep periods, or is that less clear?
No, I think that's less clear. In some ways, getting back to this idea of this wake-sleep system, we have this sleep system that is kind of the counterpoint to this wake arousal system. And so the primary nucleus region is the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, also called VLPO. And that has a particular neuron outputs that release GABA and ganglion, which work in an inhibitory way on kind of the wake-promoting ones. And so it's this kind of delicate balance of these two systems that are ongoing. In your cognitive neuroscience training, right, it sounds like it's pretty specific and focused in a particular part of the brain, the cerebellum. And one thing that I'm kind of interested in is, say you bring a participant into the study. Have you ensured that they got a good night's sleep? Have you asked them about their sleep?
In most studies, probably it is advised for participants before they come in to get a good night's sleep. So those would be recommendations that you would lay out, in communication with the participant before they come in.
What we do in our studies is we actually track people for, say, a week, and they have to kind of get in within this range of amount of sleep, and then it has to be both amount of sleep and then how kind of stable it is. That variability can really impact it, and certainly might have an impact on the machinery that's happening in the brain.
I often think that many people think that they can get by on very little sleep or less than average amount of sleep, but from what I know from the research, if you actually test those people on different batteries of cognitive tasks, you'll often find that their performance is slightly worse than maybe they had anticipated.
Yeah. So, what did you learn about sleep today?
I guess I learned that it's a system that is, very heavily regulated and influenced by, some of these older, more conserved subcortical systems in the brain, and that there's, as you called it, like a flip-flop function between wakefulness and sleep that's regulated by these specific, like dopaminergic, noradrenergic, like neurotransmitters that manifest in different subcortical parts of the brain.
So now we have sleep on your brain. That was all I wanted to hear. Good to see you again, Yue.
Yes, good to see you.
Really glad that you could join us. So we've been talking about sleep today at various levels of complexity. But now with you, I really want to talk about kind of what do we know about sleep and the aging brain. Can you tell me a little about some of the work that you've been doing in that area?
So I'm an epidemiologist, so we do a lot of work on the epidemiology of sleep and development of neurodegenerative diseases, including both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, so AD and PD. We mainly work on population studies. We work on thousands and even millions of population, and we use statistical modeling to find out the association between different sleep disturbances and also genetics related to sleep disturbances, and link that to the risk of developing AD and PD.
And so how strong is the link?
Our study has found really strong associations looking at these populations. For example, with sleep apnea, we've done one meta-analysis, and it showed that those with sleep apnea, they have odds ratio of 1.26, which means that those who have sleep apnea, they have 26% elevated risk of developing Alzheimer's compared to those without sleep apnea.
So it's interesting because I also saw that there was a recent meta-analysis around sleep disturbances and dementia risk, and in that study they looked at about 250,000 people in this meta-analysis, and they followed them for around 10 years, when they pulled all the samples together, and they found there was a 1.2-fold increased risk for developing all-cause dementia. And so it sounds like both sleep apnea and then maybe sleep disturbances more generally are associated with increased risk for dementia. When I think about that, I think about how sleep lives in the brain, these neurodegenerative diseases live in the brain. And so what do we know about the causality of this? Could it be that individuals who have early onset of, say, Alzheimer's have then kind of poor sleep as a consequence of that?
Yeah, so I think what's really fascinating is all this bidirectional relationship that's being identified in animal studies, especially showing that sleep changes actually occur very early on in the disease process. So it could be a prodromal stage of Parkinson's, and also in transgenic mouse model of AD, they are already showing a lot of circadian abnormalities in this mouse.
So within dementia risk, in particular Alzheimer's, for instance, there are kind of two clear features that seem to be part of the pathology, right? So there's kind of beta amyloid, which accumulates in the brain, and then there's kind of these tangles, this tauopathies, right? And so it sounds like, sleep seems to be related to the tauopathies. What about kind of beta amyloid?
Yes, in the transgenic mouse models of AD, including those expressing human mutant amyloid precursor protein, APP, tau, or both. So that's kind of showing the sleep changes in both of these pathologies.
Okay, so there is this bidirectional piece. But I think, perhaps the most exciting thing that happened in the sleep field, at least in my view, has been understanding the role of sleep and its clearance of beta amyloid in the brain. But this idea that sleep is like the dishwasher of the brain. It seems like that, beta accumulates as we kind of use energy, and it's kind of, it's a waste product. And the idea that if you don't clear it out, then it's going to build up and accumulate.
So the thing I'm most excited about sleep research is, I think, first of all, is this complexity of the daytime, nighttime sleep, what sleep is really doing to our body and to our brain. And then it's really from the epidemiologic or public health perspective, how we can best use sleep as a tool for the detection and prevention of neurodegeneration in the long term.
I'm excited about the future of sleep medicine. I think there are incredible innovations that are happening in the basic sciences, kind of really starting to understand what are the clear biological processes that underlie some of these things as they relate to disease risk, and what is the true function of sleep, kind of the why we sleep phenomenon, right? So this was certainly a challenge today. Everyone knew a little bit about sleep, and I think that's great because sleep is incredibly important. But there was also a lot of misinformation around kind of how sleep works and people doing sleep behaviors that may not be the most adaptive for them. We're still uncovering new things every day about how sleep works. But despite that, all of us know that sleep is fundamental to our health. And so I'm excited for sleep to kind of raise its profile among other health behaviors and get the investment and care that it needs.